Hello everyone, welcome back to another new video. Today I will be showing you another amazing chess puzzle where white must give up 10 of his pieces to win the game. In the following position, white previously tried to take all of black's pieces but found himself in a situation where if the black rook is taken, the game would be a draw due to stalemate. The only way for white to continue the game is to move the king up. Before we continue with black's best move, it's important to see just how white can escape the checks. If white can get his king to e5 with black's rook on the left side of the board, white's king can hide on g3 because rook f3 check is not stalemate after the rook is captured. Also, if white can give up his bishop on e6, he can escape the checks after white gets his king to a square where any check can be met by a queen move and win the game, because if the queen can move away, black's king will no longer be stalemated. This means that black cannot allow white to block a check with his bishop. With this in mind, black's best defense is to check on the b-file with his rook to prevent white from escaping with his king. After the white king reaches a8, black cannot play rook b8 check because of queen takes b8. So black must play rook a7 check. After king b8, checking on a8 would again allow white's king to escape, so black must continue checking on the 7th rank. After white's king reaches f8, rook f7 check is met by queen takes f7, so black must play rook e8 check. After king f7 rook e7 check king f6. It seems that white is winning as rook takes e6 allows king f5 rook f6 king e5 and soon the checks are stopped, but after rook f7 check, king e5 is met by rook f5 check, preventing white's king from reaching f4. It seems that black is for sure holding the draw, but white can play king d6 rook d5 check king e7 rook d7 check and now play king to f8 so that after rook d8 check king f7. White can give up his first piece after rook d7 check with knight to e7. With the knight on c6 gone, white can play the brilliant move king to d6 and then play king to c7. Now, after rook d7 check king d6, rook b7 check is met by the move king c6, and after rook b6 check white can play the move king to c7 with a winning position as rook b7 check allows king to d6 and e5. While rook c6 check is met by king d8 and black cannot prevent white from giving up his bishop. As a result, we can now come to the further conclusion that black must try to keep his rook on the right side of white's king at all times to not lose. Going back to king d6, black is forced to play rook d6 check, and after king a5, rook d5 check allows white to give up another piece with knight to b5. And we have almost returned to the original position except that white has managed to give up 2 pieces. However, after the cycle repeats another time, it still seems that white has not made any progress. But instead of king c7, white can play king c6 rook d6 check king b5. After rook b6 check, if white continues with king c5, black can play rook c6 check king d5 rook c5 check. And capturing the a4 pawn would mean that white's king no longer has g3 to hide on, while king to d6 simply allows rook to d5 check and white has not made any progress. White must play king c4 after rook b6 check. To prevent white's king from reaching d5 and e5, black must play rook c6 check. After king to b3 rook to c3 check king to f4 rook to c4 check, white can give up another piece with pawn to b4. The same cycle of moves repeats again, and after we get back to the king c6 rook d6 check stage, white can play king c5. After rook c6 check king b4 rook b6 check king c3 and so on up till king b4 rook c4 check, white can play king a3, and after rook to f4 check, because white has given up his b2 pawn before going into the king c5 route, white can now play king b2. After rook takes a2 check, white's king can now march to the center of the board with black's rook on the left side. However, it still seems that white has not made any progress as white's king still can't reach e5. But just at this moment, white suddenly takes black's pawn on e4 and after rook e5 check king d3 rook takes e3 check, white can escape with his king to b4, and now rook to b3 check is met by the white king going to c5 then back to d3. while rook to c4 check prolongs the game for one more move after white goes below the third rank to get to d3. Now, after rook c3 check king e4, with the rook now on the right side of white's king, white can zigzag his king along the light squares to get to the 8th rank, and after rook c5 check king d8 rook d5 check, white can finally play bishop to d7, giving up his bishop. However, with the e4 pawn gone, white still needs to be accurate until the very end. After the bishop is captured and white's king gets down to f4, if black plays rook f5 check, white can play king e4, and after rook e5 check king d3, white's king will get to b4 where both checking squares are guarded by white's queen. So black plays rook to e4 and e3 check, and now the only move for white to win is to play king h2. After rook takes h3 check king g1, if black plays rook h1 check white will play king g2, and even though black can actually win the queen back, the resulting position is an easily winning rook endgame after rook to f5. So black tries the longer lasting defense with rook to g3. Since king f1 would be a blunder due to rook g1, white gives up his second rook with rook g2, and after black gives the last series of checks along the second rank, the point of white giving up his a2 pawn before taking on e4 finally becomes clear. If white still has his a2 pawn, black can play rook to b1 check with a draw. But with the a2 pawn gone, after rook b1 check white can play king a2 and rook b2 is met by king a3, while rook a1 check is also losing as after king b2 rook b1 check king a3, rook a1 check is met by white sacrificing his final piece with queen to a2, and after rook takes a2 check king takes a2 white has a winning pawn endgame after giving up 10 pieces in the last 90 moves. Finally, if black plays rook takes g4 check instead of rook e3 check, white can get his king to c3 along the third rank, and now rook d3 check is met by rook takes d3. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see more brilliant chess puzzles be sure to like and subscribe for more. I will see you all in my next video. Goodbye.